Victory! In 1763, the American colonists were celebrating. They, alongside the mighty British Army, had defeated the French and secured the entire continent. The future looked bright, wide open, and full of opportunity. But what if the biggest threat to their freedom wasn't a foreign enemy, but the very family they had just fought for? The decade after the French and Indian War wasn't a time of peace. It was a slow-motion family argument that got uglier and uglier, turning loyal subjects into fiery rebels. This is the story of the fuel, the taxes, the protests, and the betrayals that loaded the cannon of revolution. We're about to read the King's Mail and listen in on secret meetings of rebels. If you believe in getting the whole story, consider signing our petition by hitting that like button and joining our cause by subscribing. Every signature helps sneak a peek into more stories throughout history. The first crack in the relationship came right after the war. Colonists were eager to move west into the lands they had just helped win. But King George III had other plans. To prevent another costly war with Native Americans, he issued the Proclamation of 1763. It drew a line down the Appalachian Mountains and forbid colonists from settling on the western side. This act is considered a major cause of the American Revolution. To the colonists, this was a stunning betrayal. They saw a vast continent of rich farmland being denied to them. To the king, it was just common sense, a way to manage the empire and keep the peace. But it felt less like protection and more like a cage. The king's next move hit the colonists where it really hurt: their wallets. Britain was broke from the war, and the crown implemented new British economic policies following the French and Indian War to raise money. This economic system, known as mercantilism, held that colonies existed mainly to make the mother country wealthy and powerful. This led to a firestorm, all based on one powerful idea: no taxation without representation. Colonists had no representatives in the British Parliament, 3,000 miles away. This lack of representation in Parliament was a core grievance, as they believed only their own elected assemblies had the right to tax them. First came the Sugar Act of 1764. It was a tax on sugar and molasses, and it cracked down hard on smugglers who had been avoiding taxes for years. Colonial merchants screamed in protest. But the one that truly enraged everyone was the Stamp Act of 1765. This was the first direct tax on the colonists and a major cause of the Revolution. It required a special stamp on almost all paper goods: newspapers, legal documents, playing cards, you name it. The reaction was explosive. In Virginia, a passionate lawyer named Patrick Henry gave a fiery speech, becoming a significant individual in the revolutionary movement.
Caesar had his Brutus, Charles I his Cromwell, and George III may profit by their example. If this be treason, make the most of it.
Across the colonies, secret groups like the Sons of Liberty formed, led by individuals like Samuel Adams. They organized boycotts and weren't afraid to use intimidation.
It does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority, keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men.
But Britain didn't give up. The Townshend Acts of 1767 placed taxes on everyday items. Worse, they gave officials broad authority to search anyone's property using documents called writs of assistance. Boston lawyer James Otis argued passionately against these writs.
A man's house is his castle, and whilst he is quiet, he is as well guarded as a prince in his castle.
Nowhere was the anger hotter than in Boston, where British soldiers, or redcoats, were stationed to keep order. To Bostonians, they were an occupying army. Tensions were a powder keg, and on March 5th, 1770, it exploded. A mob of angry colonists, throwing snowballs, rocks, and insults, cornered a small group of British soldiers. Panicked, the soldiers fired into the crowd. 5 colonists were killed. The first to fall was a sailor of African and Native American descent named Crispus Attucks, now known as the first martyr and a significant individual of the Revolution. Patriots called it the Boston Massacre. In a shocking twist, the soldiers were defended in court by none other than John Adams, a patriot who believed everyone deserved a fair trial. His wife, Abigail Adams, was another key figure who championed American independence. In his closing argument, Adams focused on the evidence.
Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passion, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence.
After the massacre, things cooled down for a bit. But in 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act. Now, this wasn't a new tax. It was a bailout for the British East India Company, allowing it to sell tea directly to the colonies, making it cheaper than smuggled tea. But the colonists saw the trap. Buying the cheaper tea meant accepting Parliament's right to tax them. It was a trick, and they weren't falling for it. On a cold December night, the Sons of Liberty decided to send a message. Disguised as Mohawk Indians, they boarded the 3 tea ships in Boston Harbor. In an act of organized defiance, they smashed open 342 chests of tea and dumped it all into the water. This event, known as the Boston Tea Party, is a famous example of civil disobedience in U.S. history. When news of the Boston Tea Party reached London, King George III was beyond furious. He saw it as a direct challenge to his authority.
The die is now cast. The colonies must either submit or triumph.
Parliament's response was swift and harsh. A series of laws the colonists called the Intolerable Acts, which served as the final major cause of the American Revolution. They were designed to punish Boston and crush the rebellion. The Boston Port Act completely closed the harbor until the tea was paid for. The Massachusetts Government Act took away the colony's right to self-government. The Quartering Act forced colonists to house and feed British soldiers in their own homes. But Parliament had made a massive miscalculation. Instead of isolating Boston, the Intolerable Acts united the colonies. Other colonies rallied in support, sending food and supplies. They saw the punishment of Boston as a threat to all of their freedoms. And so the fuel had been gathered. Over 10 years, a series of taxes, protests, and punishments had created a continent-wide crisis. As John Adams would later reflect, the real war was over before the first shot was even fired.
The revolution was effected before the war commenced. The revolution was in the minds and hearts of the people.
The argument was no longer about a tax on tea or a line on a map. It was about a fundamental question. Who had the right to govern America? The colonists or a distant king in Parliament? All that was needed now was a spark to ignite the fuel. Join us for part 3, as we cover the fire ignited by the shot heard round the world at the battles of Lexington and Concord, declaring independence, and the Revolutionary War itself. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe to join the Continental Army of Knowledge.